Friday. Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to another weekly privacy chat where you tolerate me. I don't rave and rant. I don't rave and rant, but wax rhapsodic, maybe a better term, on the big privacy issues of the week that are on my mind. So thank you for, I end up getting it off my chest, and then I have a good, relaxing weekend. So thank you for the therapy. I'm delighted to have an old friend, Ben Isaacson, with me today because Ben's provocative. Ben's provocative. He's provocative because he thinks hard about the consequences beyond the very specific application of new and old privacy laws and rules. We go way, way back. He doesn't look that old, but me and him, we're pretty old. We go way back to my early career in privacy, starting out initially at DoubleClick. You were working for, was it an email marketing company at the time, or at
the time it was called the Association for Interactive Marketing, which was part of the Direct Marketing Association, the DMA. So I was running that trade association, or subsidiary of the DMA.
And so we lived through those sort of early days of everyone trying to figure out what the rules should be and how current consumer protection law, given that it was really before lots of the so-called privacy law went into place. And he counsels a wide range of clients. I always feel that in our world, people are never sort of good enough in talking about sort of their conflicts, right? And it doesn't mean that if you work for a particular company or set of companies that like we shouldn't believe you, but like you learn and things are shaped by often what you know and what you hear a lot about. So I always feel that as an organization supported by several hundred companies, all who disagree with each other, big, small, large tech, but also by major foundations that aren't so much interested in the company stuff, but more how does data get used for societal good, as well as U.S. National Science Foundation funding, as well as deeply engaged with academics and civil society folks who are on our advisory board. I feel like I'm talking to a wide range of people. They all disagree. They all want to inform me, and I cannot conceivably please them all. And so I don't try to please them all because I cannot. I want to be informed by all the views, but I gotta simply talk about what I think makes sense, and hopefully people appreciate that. So you represent lots of smaller companies, medium-sized companies, not necessarily big tech companies. Is that
well, it's a smattering. I do work with one very, very large tech company that I've been working with for 7 years. It's on my LinkedIn if you care to look at it. But I do, in terms of the data brokers and what we're talking about today, they are predominantly small businesses that aren't, the major, companies you've heard of before.
Yeah, so let's talk about that dirty word data broker for a second, because there was a time when nobody was a data broker. And when I say nobody was a data broker, when you would talk to policymakers about how to define the term, because there was some general consensus that companies that don't deal with consumers and just sell your data, well, there's something untoward about that. Maybe it's tolerated and needed. We don't want to ban it. It might be not even constitutional to ban it, but we don't like it. And people don't know about it. And so they don't know to opt out. They don't know where they could go. Do they have the rights? And where would they even know? Where do they even know anyone is selling their data to go do it? And then here you have this whole world where everyone's data is being bought and sold. And who are they even selling it to? Do they have good rules? Do they sell it to bad people? Do they sell it to foreign adversaries, and so on and so forth? And so policymakers always wanted, better rights and better ways to deal with data brokers. But everybody would show up and explain how they were not technically a data broker because they were a first party that consumers deal with, but maybe they do sell data, but that's not their main business. It's only part of their business. And, in the early days, Axiom, Jennifer Barrett Glasgow, now retired, and then later on, Sheila Kolpischer, were like the only ones who were ready to show up and say, here's what we do. We sell data. Here's how, and their argument often was that the people who need this for competition, for competitiveness, were not necessarily the biggest companies, not that they didn't do their share, but it was the little companies who didn't have a big customer list and who needed to find the people who needed golf clubs, and rather than put a catalog in every single mailbox and shove up your mail with expensive things that cost them money, finding those audiences was a valuable thing. So do we need data brokers? Like, let's start with sort of the first premise. There are some who argue, and actually I think we have a debate about this at our annual event in DC. We're actually going to have a debate about, data brokers. Are they uncontrollable? Too much trouble? Ban it, restrict it, make life hard for them, or are they critical to business competition, keeping prices? Like, is there an argument in favor of the data broker?
Yeah, so let's just go, like, the lawyer in me has to like define data broker here in this context, because there are really three different kinds of data brokers that, in my opinion, really require three different kinds of legislative or regulatory actions. The first, which has been around for 50 years, is under the FCRA and the consumer reporting agencies. Those are all data brokers, right? And that industry was really what founded the rest of the industry, right? And I think, we should talk more about where the FCRA is and how expansive it is, and really how it should apply more today, and maybe just be amended to resolve it on a federal level rather than all these like state, death by paper cut solutions, right?
So we agree. We need
the second
those
category,
people, right? We need them. Like, you got to get credit. Someone's got to go look stuff up about you. We don't really love it, but in places where you can't easily get that information, you see the impact on the availability of credit. Okay, regulate them, but we need them.
So that's number one. I think the adjacency to that is the people search data brokers. And they did hit, national headlines with the Supreme Court case with Spokio a number of years ago, and the whole injury in fact issue that, I think really helped set the tone for a lot of case law in the space, even though it was a very messed up case law decision. But the people search companies are the ones that I think get the most attention from a PR perspective on who is a data broker. And all of these like Delete Me and companies that have like the cottage industry of third-party agents around data broker, harms, are really more talking about this category. And so we've seen some laws like the Daniels Act in New Jersey, which has caused, chaos in the marketing world, partially because the law was never intended to apply to that other category, but really intended for the people search category and doxing and, again, real harms that come from those types of data uses. But it's the third category that you and I are really talking about today, which is the marketing data or advertising data uses, where we're talking about, frankly, every individual in America, and frankly, probably everybody in the world, are now part of these sort of marketing databases that can be bought and sold for, for targeted ads. And that's where, we're now seeing all these state privacy laws really focused on this industry, as well as people search and other data uses that, again, people haven't really thought through all the implications of.
Well, so some of the critique, right, is that those distinctions aren't always clear, because you hear about companies that are, in theory, in the marketing world, and then the data somehow ends up being used for government or for other purposes. The DMA, I have often pointed out to businesses, used to have, I imagine still has, a rule that says marketing data should only be used for marketing purposes. And whenever you see, and I don't know, maybe they don't enforce it well, or it's not as well known, or it should be enforced better, or maybe there are companies that are just not in the DMA or whatever, but it feels like the critique that civil society and regulators bring is, look, it would be one thing if the worst thing that happened is that, some company marketed the golf clubs to you and the data was wrong, or you're not happy that they know you buy golf clubs, and, misapplications of non-sensitive marketing stuff. But when it's location, and when it's various sensitive things, and when there are all these examples that are highlighted, disclosing someone's, sexual orientation, the whole ICE and Homeland Security, like, do they have a legitimate point that industry maybe, has hurt itself by not well enough policing the untoward practices, and as a result, you end up having this it's hard to legislate with like a surgery. I mean, legislation is a sledgehammer. I mean, that's just the unfortunate reality. It's super hard to be so precise without deferring it to rulemaking. And then we'll talk about what happens when you defer it to, expert rulemaking as well, where, it sometimes becomes a runaway train. So does industry have to sort of, hey, sorry, we messed up and now we're getting over-regulated because we didn't well enough keep things in the lane that we should have?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sensitive data categories are the ones that are obviously got the most attention, and we even have a federal law now, the Protecting Americans' Data from Foreign Adversaries Act of 2024, plus an executive order that even that was initially under Biden and now adopted under the Trump administration, where since you can't sell sensitive data to this list of potential owners of companies, not just the countries, but from owners of companies that might be residents of those countries, like Iran or North Korea, Russia, although maybe they'll be taken off the list soon. But the point is, like, this includes a whole category of sensitive data. One of those categories is advertising related data from interest-based, data collection. So you visit websites, companies collect, through third-party cookies. Now they have to do diligence on the buyers of that data to target ads if they're from one of those countries. And that's, again, I think that's a good initiative. It's hard to enforce. It's hard to do diligence on this, but again, it's a hard problem that should be solved, because selling sensitive data should have a higher scrutiny. But again, this like sort of death by paper cut state law definition of what is sensitive, what isn't, especially Washington's law with a private right of action against what health related data could be sold. It's increasingly complicated to touch any of this. It's sort of radioactive now. Like health data is kind of in some cases, like Washington has become like radioactive for the data industry. Same with ethnicity, which has been a common thing for decades to be able to use. But there are other categories like religion or other certain other aspects where it's like, well, let's pause here for a second and ask ourselves, do we really need that data? Like, is it more harm than it's worth? And I think those are the conversations happening now.
Okay. So one more bigger picture before we jump into California. We were talking briefly about the general notion that the word data broker is being used very broadly as a way of both responding to some bad examples, but at the end of the day also just giving people certain rights, transparency about who's got the data, and the right to go opt out. And at the end of the day, that's maybe not a bad thing, but sometimes using a term very broadly has much broader consequences. And this is something you had pointed to early in the days of CCPA. But here's one thing that I like to point out about CCPA that has given lots of rights, and other states, following in that line, and people have rights to opt out and delete and so forth in a way that I think is generally positive. But here's the big bad thing that both of us, I think, saw happening, just understanding data flows and business dynamic. Because the term sale was used so broadly in CCPA, you had a reality before the California law that most companies said, we will not sell your personal information. Now, yes, there was ad tech, and we got to deal with that. And ad tech can be messy and create sort of big holes. But generally, the core personal information, the sensitive data, the records about purchases, like the core databases of companies, most companies, certainly Fortune 500, said previously, we will not sell your personal information. And yeah, then they said, oh, here's what we do with ad tech. And as somebody who worked on the internal side, and as you do in terms of providing advice, you could kill all kinds of harebrained deals that internal business people wanted to do, because you could say, hey, we don't sell our personal information. Hey, that's not good for the company, but if you're the one who gets to decide that from a business point of view, fine. You legally can't do it because our privacy policy says you can't. Sorry, you can't do it. As a result of the fact that almost no company, except for some of the very big platforms, was comfortable saying we don't sell personal information, because of the fact that they would had to say, well, but ad tech relationships technically are the default has been flipped, and almost every company now says we sell you personal information. And then later in their policy they say, well, we do, we don't, we might, and some just don't. We sell it, and now internal business people don't have that same legal check, and so that's been a negative. What's the negative of a lot of people? We'll get into how perhaps the California goes wide, but let's take for granted for a second that the California law goes very wide and it captures a lot of stuff that's maybe broader than what people would have typically expected, at least people on the industry side. What's the downside of having a bunch of more places where you can go delete your data? What's the harm?
Yeah, I want to get to that question, but I guess like there's a really important issue of sell and sale and in license, if we want to use that term, because it's become like as a lawyer, like I spend a lot of my day splitting hairs on like data agreements, data related agreements now, especially for even some very big advertisers that say, we're going to call this a sale because we have to under state law, but we're going to put in X, Y, and Z controls that say you can't actually use the data for any other purpose other than what we're engaging on in this agreement. You're not going to be data brokering my data. And this is really an important issue that I think a lot of companies just haven't really spent enough time on, especially in ad tech, where you need to kind of look at those agreements, because most of these ad tech companies, that are licensing the data for sale purposes are actually going to potentially be a data broker. And certainly under the California law, they are a data broker. But whether you contribute to that data brokering is a choice, right? You don't have to, just because it's called a sale doesn't mean you have to actually sell it for a license for that company to then use it for onboard transfer, whatever other third-party purposes they might do with that. So that's where we are as an industry, and we have to go further as an industry to make sure it's clear. Sale does not always mean sale, right? In the same context of the word. Because this data broker, I think, registry that's coming, I think the mechanism that's coming, the registry is pretty straightforward, but the mechanism that's coming in California next year is a really big deal. And I don't think there's been enough attention to what it means to those companies that will have to register, especially the ones that haven't registered yet, and the whole industry. Because if you're a California resident, certainly you're going to sign up for this thing. Like just like the vast majority, I think, of federal, of people in the U.S. have signed up for the do not call list. At least they did. Maybe we don't change numbers so much anymore, so you don't have to do it again. But it'll be ubiquitous, right? My assumption for Californians, other states will follow, and all of a sudden now we've got a very complex system with very clear statutory penalties, which we should talk about. But I'll pause there. For a second.
Is the downside then? I was thinking that you were going to tell me the downside is that what I see happening now in sort of TV and OTT and so forth, right? We've got a lot of players in the ecosystem, web and then mobile, and accounts are linked together, but they're not linked together. But I have to cooperate with the global opt-out, but I don't actually have that identifier consistently across. Like there's a lot of, please guarantee this data was consented, and therefore I don't have to respect any opt-out. Well, but I can't. Like there's a lot of confusion about the ecosystem being able to support, because of different views. I think it's a sale, you think it's not a sale. So I don't think I have to cooperate with an opt-out, but you think you do. My vendor thinks it's a sale. I don't think it's a sale. They want to cooperate. You don't want to cooperate because, right? So there's a mess because of inconsistency of interpretations, of technical platforms, blah, blah, blah. But it seems like if I understand right, you're by comparing it to the FCC do not call, which has solved my problem. No longer do I get telemarketing calls. Haha. I don't get any spam either because we passed canned spam. But the concern is, I guess, that this is going to be an appealing thing and everyone will sign up and it will really devastate. Telemarketing was devastating. And when I say it's devastating is that industry in large part, well, went away, and all I get is the bad stuff, and kind of the legitimate telemarketing is, and okay, maybe some people aren't crying about that because they don't get phone calls selling them stuff from legitimate companies in the middle of the day. Maybe they didn't want it anyway, but okay, there was an industry there and it went away. I suppose if some of the industries here go away, we're worried that like there's going to be a negative. And is the negative simply that the people search people won't, be able to offer their services? So don't have a lot of sympathy for the fact that when you Google me, 20 companies looking to, charge me to go look up, whether I've ever been a sex offender or whatever it is, are no longer there? Or is it gonna, I don't know, make legitimate companies delete their like first party customer lists? Like, what's the problem?
Yeah.
Everyone, are we going to hit economic activity in some devastating way if that happens? What's the problem?
Yeah, I mean, and on the people search, just coming back to that a second, a lot of these state laws, including California's, exempt public record data. And so if you're pulling property record data or mortgage filings or whatever, data you can pull off federal database or government databases, you're exempt. When now California just enforced against a company that made inferences on that data just a couple of weeks ago, which is a really big deal because very few companies that get public record data just sit on it as a plain text file without doing anything with it. But again, so the people search companies, they'll keep going, right? They'll figure out a way to make that public record data more accessible. For the marketing industry, yeah, I mean, we've been, and again, my first job basically was working for the DMA. The DMA doesn't exist anymore. I think that's an important point to make. The Direct Marketing Association was around for 100 years, had thousands of members, had big trade shows. A lot of those companies were very clearly focused on the data industry in this particular context. And now it got subsumed into the ANA, who really doesn't pay much attention to this stuff, which is a huge problem. And I think as a result, we've gotten all these data broker laws that the DMA couldn't massage into something more people search focused or something more harmful focused. So the industry at large, we've been doing this for again 100 years, trying to help companies prospect to new audiences. I think that's the most obvious one. Is you can help identify potential customers from a whole mix of different data attributes, and that it's going to be increasingly harder to do that, especially even with, again, retargeted ads in the context of California and some of these other state laws saying you're now a data broker as well if you just simply sell retargeted interest-based audiences. It's going to make it just as hard to prospect online as it is with what used to be direct mail and email and other channels. But now it's sort of this, it's all kind of online now, right? In some hybrid digital way. So that's a huge economic question mark that we just don't really know yet, but it certainly will have a major impact, especially in California in the next, 18 months here.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into California, but let me just agree that critics in this space who don't like marketing don't often spend any time engaging with the broader, quite definitive economic literature that need marketing. Who doesn't need marketing? The people who already have your attention because you're spending all your day, with great respect for my friends in the big company world, but the services you need to use because you spend all your time with them, whether it's tech platform stuff or just banking, retail, like they've got a lot of ways to sell you more stuff, right? The retailers where I spend all my money, they got my brains, they can try to sell me more stuff. If we care about small businesses, medium businesses, new entrants into the market, they need ways to reach customers. If we limit and constrain, and again, we got to constrain the bad practices, the overly aggressive, the deceptive ones, the ones that can be misused. But if you don't come to the table with, we need marketing, we need advertising, it is critical for competition. It's critical for keeping prices low. Otherwise, you just stick with the brands or you pay for the cheapest stuff. Someone's got to be able to show up and say, hey, I'm different, I'm cool, I'm new, other than the typical. Okay, what does California do that goes beyond the notion of data broker? Maybe let's talk about the first party data that if you retain it too long captures you. What's the concern there? That brings a lot of people who probably never thought they'd be into data broker land,
Yeah, I mean, the California, again, they passed the SB 362, the Delete Act, and included a definition of data broker that was already pretty broad. But the California Privacy Protection Agency has gone in and done regulations. They greatly expanded the definition in their November 2024 approved regulations, and then just a couple weeks ago released a new set of regulations that slightly changes that definition a little bit, at least on one category. That was probably the most important category for your question, which is about first-party data. But also it sort of clarifies and expands the definition of what is third-party data to really any indirect relationship. And so what they clarified, again, which let me just be clear, these are draft regulations. The current regulations in California say, as a first party, if you collect data and you do not engage with that individual in 3 years, and you sell that data after 3 years, you're a data broker. So they created a definition that included first-party data, which was sort of an eye-opener, didn't get enough attention, but I think enough comments came in that persuaded them to walk that back in the latest regulations, so that first-party data is truly exempt. But the definition of first-party is now clarified to say the consumer must intentionally interact with that business. So when we talk about cookies in particular, this is super important. When you visit a website, maybe because there's some pop-up on the website that says there's cookies happening, and maybe most consumers know there are cookies happening. But to say I'm interacting with the Google cookie because I visited this website, is that really an intentional interaction? Just because there's some pop-up notice on the website that says there's a cookie here, or it's in my browser, settings that I could see, or a Ghostery plugin, or whatever I'm using to say there are cookies on this website, and maybe Google is one of them. I don't think so, and I think that's what the CPPA is trying to get at here, is to say the consumer interacts with the website; they're not interacting with the cookie. And so if Google then sells that cookie, the interest-based part of that cookie, to other advertisers on other websites, does that make them a data broker? And I think that's what the CPPA is going for here, to say very clearly any indirect collection that's used for third-party sales is a data broker activity. So it's incredibly broad, and might apply to, again, like the whole ad tech, ad network ecosystem, right? Like we're talking about Google here, so it applies to a lot of other companies too.
Yeah. So how could it be otherwise, though? So if I collect data via a form, and then I go hand it over to some company, or I let them in the background, whether there's a pop-up or not, collect data in my store from my site, and then they routinely transfer that data to other parties. How is that different? Now, I would argue that some of ad tech, and I think typically already gets captured probably by sale if the data is being sold to other parties. I do think some of ad tech platforms and elsewhere do then take constraints to say, I'm not actually letting you get individual use of that data. I may create a profile, I might do XYZ, but I will not further sell that data, or so on and so forth. So, is your argument that most ad tech, all ad tech, I mean, obviously, if I'm some third-party data platform selling to all comers, kind of hard to argue it don't look data broker-ish, right?
Yeah, I'm not arguing they're not data brokers. First of all, like I think they are data brokers, and I think the consumer would expect them to fall into that category if they're then reselling that data to third-party advertisers. I think the point is Google is not a registered data broker under California law today. Neither is a vast majority, I think, of the ecosystem that's engaged in this space, and I think that's where the problem lies, is that there's just hasn't been enough education or awareness that this law exists. This regulation is on the books today. It's not like just the draft regulation that they're changing.
Yeah.
And that there are maybe thousands of companies that should be registered.
Right. And one challenge is like, to the extent I go register somewhere, I'm providing my name and so on and so forth. Very often the parties in this chain don't have your identity. They may be doing IP and pixel related stuff. It could be cookie related stuff. Is the Ashkan Soltani, I'm going to name it after him because he's leaving and he's been the focus of sort of building it technically. Is it going to say, let this government site track your IP address and collect your cookies and so on and so forth, so that it can facilitate the kinds of non-explicit identity-related opt-outs that are needed? Are we really building that central cookie technology opt-out database? That's going to be damn hard, creepy, weird.
But you've been in this for as long as I have. Like, we built this 13 years ago with the Digital Advertising Alliance, and they have a place you can go, opt-out.aboutads.info. It's been around for a dozen years now, where you can go and just select all and get off of 300 or something different ad networks.
Remember when the FTC was proposing some central technical cookie related opt-out database and all civil society went crazy? I think they might now be in a different place though, where they might even want the government to run this sort of thing. Although with today's government chasing immigrants and grabbing our data without regard to the Privacy Act, maybe sensitivity to having a real massive hacker prone technical overreaching opt-out database might be a little concerning to some civil society. I don't know.
I think, again, like, the FTC can do a deal with the DAA tomorrow and license this and throw it up there on their website and then preempt all these state laws. Like, I think that's what the industry would really like to see, is that there's certainly for cookies, this is a simple problem we already solved. Let's make it a federal preemption, approach. If you want to make it a do not cookie list, DAA is right here. I'm sure Lou would be happy to talk to the FTC about that, because it already exists, right?
Oh, what a challenge. We are at time. You all have to go back to work. Ben, when I next see you, I'm going to give you one of the latest pieces of FFPF swag, our new beanie of sorts. We'll be debating this issue in Washington. Take a look. Please put on your agenda, folks who are listening, our event. We're only touching on the surface here, but that's our goal, to give you a little bit of flavor. Ben, thanks for joining us. If you guys are interested, find him online. Wise and effective counsel with great experience and an old friend. Happy Friday, everybody. Thanks to the FPF team for helping make things happen, and we'll see you all soon.
Okay. Thanks,
Ben.
All right. Talk to you soon.